We've reached a point in gaming where customers like old Pliny here will happily plunk down dollar after dollar for DLC. In the last couple of years alone, I've bought and enjoyed Far Harbor, Nuka World, Blood and Wine and Hearts of Stone, The Frozen Wilds, Ashes of Ariandel and The Ring City, The Old Hunters, every piece of Destiny DLC, and a whole bunch more that I'm not even remembering right now. I bought a couple of mounts in World of Warcraft back in the dawn of the microtransaction movement. Shit, I bought Overwatch loot boxes twice, though I immediately regretted it, and looking back, that was about the time I got frustrated with the drop rates and just stopped playing. A ton of games have made small and steady progress towards the games as service model, in which the initial purchase price is just a starting point, and companies are getting increasing amounts of their money from stripping out content that would have been included in the base game a few years ago. This has caused controversy, from Cassandra's howling in the abyss. Jim Sterling's been pointing out the insidious nature of microtransactions and full-price release for ages, and while his anti-corporatism is more idealistic than mine, because I am old and have less energy for outrage, his reporting has been on the money. So why is it that the latest EA controversy surrounding Battlefront 2 is so much bigger than what came before? EA was able to sell 14 million copies of Star Wars Battlefront. It was half a game that had less features than the original that came out 10 years ago. But then they were able to sell the other half of the game to consumers in form of map packs to only mild grumbling and discontent. But the outrage over Battlefront 2 has caused a furor that has even spilled into the mainstream press, forcing, for I think probably the first time, a publisher to backtrack and, at least temporarily, turn off the microtransaction system at launch. So why? Why has Battlefront 2 caused such a firestorm when for years companies have been able to sell us skins and mounts and DLC missions and map packs and cosmetic loot boxes with only some complaining but no appreciable effect on sales? Unraveling this requires a very brief overview of the last Star Wars Battlefront and Battlefront 2's progression system, just in case you've recently returned from a tour at the McMurdo Station in Antarctica and have no idea what's going on. In 2013, Disney, after purchasing the rights to the Star Wars license, shuttered Lucas Games and looked to sell the exclusive rights to make Star Wars games. A property this massive was only realistically open to the very largest of publishers, and EA quickly scooped up 10 years of exclusive rights. They started by giving the single-player title to Visceral Games, who was beloved for the first two Dead Space games, and then Visceral tabbed Amy Hennig, formerly of Uncharted fame, to direct and produce. We all know how that turned out. Luckily, there's almost no way to fuck up a Star Wars Battlefront game. The series was already well established, and the years since Lucas released those games, the appetite for multiplayer-only titles has only increased. Realistically, all EA and DICE had to do was reskin the original releases with current generation graphics, and they'd have been huge hits and Game of the Year contenders. But that's not what EA and DICE did. Instead, they stripped features that were available in the first games out. They decided to release this thing with only 4 large mode maps. 4. But not to worry. EA was ready to sell you the rest of those maps over the next 2 years at the cost of almost another base game. There were no space battles, and while the production value was high, player count dropped quickly and only further fragmented as DLC package after DLC package continued to split the player base. Fans grumbled. They felt like they'd been sold half a game, and EA said, hey, we hear you, and we will address those complaints in the sequel. This brings us to Battlefront 2. Early previews looked extremely promising. There's a single-player campaign, and more maps and modes at launch, including space battles. And to everyone's surprise, EA announced there'd be no map packs. All future maps added would be updates and not paid DLC. Then people got their hands on the game, and while most said the gameplay was solid, there was still some problems. The same lack of depth in the gameplay was there, and the new classes kind of felt underwhelming to play, but still, while being slightly disappointing, the overall production values were so high, and the modes seemed fun, and the attention to detail in the environments and characters were top-notch, demonstrating what big publishers like EA can accomplish when they decide to ramp up production value to the nth degree. There was one big problem, though. Players saw that star cards were back, and that they'd be given out in loot crates that could be bought with real-world money. These weren't insignificant cosmetic items and skins. They were powerful stat boosts that would give the player who spent money on loot boxes up to a 30% advantage on one who only paid for the base game itself. This caused outrage. But I intend to argue that as terrible as this system is, and boy, it is fucking terrible, it's not what all this is really about. The reason people hate this system more than any other monetization system tried in any other full-price AAA game is because it destroys the illusion of the relationship between the game maker and the game player, and brings into painfully sharp focus that this relationship is actually between developer and customer. Previous efforts at continuing monetization in AAA games have always strived to be completely incidental to the gameplay itself. World of Warcraft microtransaction mounts didn't affect the gameplay because by that time, Warcraft mounts no longer had different speeds. You were only paying for a cool-looking mount. Ditto Overwatch. And while I would argue that cosmetic items and different skins had previously been parts of the content you bought with the base game, and a big reason players would grind in the first place, game developers could at least say that the ability to buy cosmetic items with real-world money did not in any way affect the way the game was created, tuned, balanced, or enjoyed. And to be fair to them, that's basically true. My experience playing Overwatch is the same whether I buy a bunch of loot boxes and get the skin I want, or if I don't buy any loot boxes and have bad luck and never get Officer Diva. You might enjoy your gaming experience more after nabbing that skin, but the moment-to-moment gameplay, the core gameplay loop, is completely unaffected. This has been the law of the gaming land for years outside of the free-to-play space, where consumers were willing to tolerate intrusive monetization models because the base experience was free. Not anymore, though. What makes Star Wars Battlefront 2 a new and terrible change is that the monetization system was clearly baked directly in. Video game progression systems have been tuned and adjusted for decades, and they've arrived at a general consensus. Players unlock more skills, weapons, and powers the more they play. Each match gets you closer to something you had your eye on. You're working towards a goal, and you have a clear path to getting to that goal. And games have been balanced to make that grind just long enough to feel like you've accomplished something without feeling like the developer is wasting your time. It's basically been perfected, which is why most people play games until they finish leveling, before they drop out of the endgame at various stages, depending on how satisfying that endgame is, or what their tolerance or enjoyment for repetitive grinding is. Star Wars Battlefront 2 completely does away with a regular leveling system in favor of all of your progress being made through random drops from loot boxes. Are you interested in trying a different rifle in your loadout? Well, you'll have to hope it drops from a random number generator. You want to try a different grenade or a cooldown skill? Too bad, random number generator. This takes the core gameplay loop of playing matches, getting XP, and spending that XP on items or abilities you want before trying them out and using them to unlock more and different abilities, and breaks it. It's utterly impossible to believe that this system was deemed more fun. Which means that this system was instituted for a different reason. Monetization. So what that means is that countless hours of development time and intellectual effort was expended not on making that progression system as fun and compelling as possible, but rather to maximize ongoing revenue streams without utterly ruining the experience. There's a big difference between balancing a system to be fun and balancing a system to be less obnoxious. It says to the player that their fun, their enjoyment of the moment-to-moment gameplay was less important to the developers than hitting a certain threshold that would spur the most loot box purchases. And this changes everything. It drops all pretense in the relationship. It removes the veil that we were all happy to have up and makes the actual game maker to game player interaction explicit and transparent. It's not game maker to game player. It's game monetization developer to ongoing customer. In a normal progression system, the consumer can be completely confident that the only consideration that was made in development was how to make that system as fun and engaging to the most players for the longest possible time. Great care has always gone on to game economies to make that experience smooth and fun and make progress feel consistent and earned. In this system, you have zero agency. You don't unlock anything through play. You earn the right to have a chance of getting something you might or may not want to use. And because it's now clear to everybody that maximizing their enjoyment was not the goal at the heart of this progression system, it's obvious to all what the goal actually was. The goal was to frustrate just enough to spur extra loot box sales without frustrating so much that people simply put the game down and don't come back. That's supposed to be an invisible consideration to the consumer. We shouldn't see that decision. Profit maximization is a business and publisher goal, not a game maker goal. The goal of a game maker has traditionally been to simply make a great game. And so what you're left with is players realizing that they aren't players. They're marks to be fleeced. The system isn't designed for your fun. It's designed to be less fun, so that you pay more in the hope that the game becomes fun. This monetization scheme is built into the gameplay in a way that's obtrusive, obnoxious, and aggressively not fun. I find it amusing that EA and DICE seemed caught off guard by the scale of this controversy. The only thing amazing about it is that EA and DICE didn't realize it was coming. The fact that playtesters didn't go crazy over this shows the limits of making decisions off of the reactions of people in a highly controlled environment. This controversy was always going to happen, because EA and DICE forgot that players expect the games they paid for to be developed first and foremost with their enjoyment in mind. The proper development cycle is to make a game that people want to play, and then decide how best to go get as much money as possible from it. That's entirely reasonable and defensible. I might not like it, but I understand it, and I realize it's a necessity now. But balancing actual core gameplay around a monetization strategy is a recipe for disaster, because what's most fun and what's most profitable aren't necessarily correlated. They might have nothing to do with each other, in fact, and trying to tie those two considerations together rips the caul from consumers' eyes and leaves them bitter and feeling like nothing more than wallets with legs. No matter how much we disliked DLC or microtransactions or cosmetic loot boxes, we could at least be certain that developers made the core gameplay as fun as they could. They operated with a singular focus: make this game as much fun as we can with the resources available. EA and DICE tried to bypass that and go directly to how to make as much money as possible, and I guess that's finally a bridge too far. Thanks.